Welcome to the K in Clarity podcast. I'm the host, Mezue. During this episode, we're joined by Dr. Kasia Hein-Peters, founder of Abante Scientific. Kasia has been instrumental in driving innovation and digital transformation within healthcare and life sciences space. She leverages cutting-edge technologies to address major health challenges, focusing on developing AI and machine learning solutions to improve healthcare performance and scaling innovations for healthcare, life science, and digital health organizations. Her extensive experience spans multiple areas, including digital health solutions, vaccine development and marketing, medical device innovation, and health equity initiatives. Kasia has contributed to innovative care delivery models, led global marketing efforts for novel vaccines, demonstrated positive patient outcomes from medical devices, and working on improving communication between patients and clinicians through technology. Her multifaceted approach to healthcare innovation, combined with her medical background and industry experience, has positioned her as a key figure in driving advancements across various sectors of healthcare and life sciences industry. In this conversation, we discuss the critical role of innovation in healthcare, emphasizing the importance of systemic approaches, collaboration, and understanding market dynamics. She highlights the transformative potential of AI and behavioral science in improving patient care access and addresses the challenges faced by startups and larger organizations in the healthcare sector. The discussion also touches on the significance of trust and active listening and leadership, as well as the need for personalized healthcare solutions. If this is your first time tuning in, here's the gist. The healthcare industry is buzzing with innovations, but there's a lot of noise and misconceptions out there. That's where we come in. Because of my experience in the healthcare ecosystem, I've gained a unique vantage point into the industry's inner workings. We're bringing you the conversations that typically happen behind boardrooms and strategy sessions, the real challenges, innovative solutions, and game-changing insights that are reshaping healthcare as we know it. On this podcast, we're bringing you face-to-face with the industry's leading founders, executives, and innovators. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of building and scaling healthcare companies, the hurdles they've overcome, and the challenges that have led to their success. More importantly, we dive into the personal challenges that come with trying to change a system as complex as U.S. healthcare. So whether you're a healthcare entrepreneur, a medical professional, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, this podcast is your backstage pass to the mind shaping the industry. Now let's have Kasia tell us a little bit about themselves. Welcome, Kasia. Very excited to talk about innovation, particularly within healthcare. For the people listening, could you let us know a little bit who you are and what you do as well?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be on your podcast. So my name is Kasia Hein-Peters. I am a physician by training, but I very early in my career transitioned to work for the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. So most of my professional career, I was in charge of implementing innovations, scaling up innovations. About 3 years ago, I left the corporate world and started working more with the startup companies. And my major motivation was to be basically two things. One was to be really closer to where breakthrough innovation happens. And secondly, to help startup companies to be more successful. Because, as we both know, around 90% of new technologies fail. And we want more new breakthrough technologies to be available for patients eventually.
Over here, we like to do an icebreaker first before we dive into the meat of the topic. And so the icebreaker question that I have for you is, if you could implement one groundbreaking innovation within healthcare, what would that be and why?
So that's a very good question. Thank you for that. So I think that what we are really missing in healthcare, and we are missing this around the globe, not just in the United States, is equity. It's the fact that people of different backgrounds and socioeconomic levels are getting very different levels of healthcare. And I think that, and we will not solve it overnight, but I think that one breakthrough innovation that could happen relatively fast is to make sure that everyone, every general practitioner, every primary care clinic has access to some of the diagnostic tools that are AI enabled and therefore broadly available, could be broadly available if we wanted to put our mind and effort into it, because AI enabled, for example, imaging results could be much broader available than radiologists who have to read these results. So we can imagine a situation where primary care around the world in any location, remote or not remote, has access to AI-enabled diagnostic tools, and only in very complicated cases they start engaging radiologists. This would eliminate enormous amounts of bottlenecks because in many locations primary care is reasonably well developed while we are missing specialists. So I think that's one thing that I would change, and this could be done for multiple different imaging diagnostic tools, as well as for diagnosing skin lesions, because as you know, AI is very good in reading images. So everywhere where the image is involved in medicine, AI actually could be the first kind of reviewer of this image and telling us what the most probable diagnosis is.
Okay, very interesting. I think AI is all the rage right now. People are excited about AI, and we know the capabilities of imaging. But is there any other capabilities that you see AI changing in healthcare that could bring about, better care results for patients and providers alike?
I think there are several. I see, for example, an emergence of very sophisticated chatbots because we are not only using natural language processing anymore, we start using large language models as well. So I see chatbots that interact with patients almost the same way as if it was a person. And I think that's a great improvement because, as you know, in the past, we always could say if the chatbot is talking with us, right? It was a bit robotic. It's becoming less robotic and it's becoming much more precise. And I think this has very interesting use cases because it could be not only patient, like administrative cases, like a patient intake forms, etc., or scheduling appointments, but it could be supporting patients with chronic diseases. Right? Patients with chronic diseases could have usually multiple questions, especially at the very beginning when the diagnosis is made. They really don't know how to change their lifestyle. They listen to a physician and don't understand, 80% of what's said to them. So having this support from a chatbot that's really well trained and can answer most questions is very helpful. And then another use case that I am particularly interested in is in psychiatry, because some of these chatbots can deliver almost as good therapy as a human being. And I know that many therapists and psychiatrists don't like to hear that, but the reality is that there are never enough therapists and psychiatrists. So what do you do with patients who wait for 2 months for a psychiatric therapy or talk therapy? Do you leave them be, or would you give them an application that they can talk with, and this is already improving their state of mind before they actually can get to a therapy?
One thing that you mentioned there had me thinking, what makes somebody actually want to innovate quicker within healthcare? And this is particularly focused at, startups and larger corporate organizations. How can they innovate in a system and do things quicker?
It's a good question because startups try to do things quick. And they definitely do things quicker than big corporations, and yet they're less risk averse, and yet they obviously fail more as well for a variety of reasons. But I think that in general, if you want to do things quicker, it's a counterintuitive method. You need to do it more thoroughly and more systematically. Because if companies don't do things systematically, then the probability of failure is higher. And sometimes they have to go back and redo certain things. So as we always say, move fast, 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 I would always say move fast and systematically. Because a systematic approach saves people, at the end saves time and also saves a lot of money that otherwise is wasted.
I was talking to a specific leader, about how innovation going quicker can also be happening through co-collaboration. And so what are your thoughts on co-collaboration for startups and organizations working particularly, let's say, with health systems or practices that to actually bring about the innovations, providers want to see? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that without collaboration and co-creation, we cannot really develop solutions that work well for clinicians and for patients. And I think this person that you spoke with, he was actually spot on, because if a patient are not involved in the co-creation of a solution, there are always some mistakes, or there are always, people have to go back to the drawing board after they launch it. So it does save actually a lot of time if most stakeholders are engaged in developing of a new solution from the start. And clinicians and patients is one aspect, but they also, especially in the pharmaceutical sector, we can think about people who are responsible for reimbursement being involved in the clinical development program of new innovations, of drugs, for example, because you develop slightly different set of data through a clinical program for regulatory authorities. But then payers want somewhat different data. So if you can put as much of these different types of data to develop during the same clinical program, you are basically saving time. Otherwise, you have to do it afterwards, right? So the product is not reimbursed because the data have not been created that payers are looking at. So it's very important to have all stakeholders around the table and collaborate on the new technology.
Very interesting. What is maybe some challenging products that you've endured, right, and projects that you've seen that have been challenging to innovate within healthcare? And what do you think leaders can probably take away from that to implement within their own organizations?
I have been working now for several years within or with different companies. And I think that how to talk about it without spending too much time on that. I think that the most challenging project that I have been in charge of was actually a vaccine. It was a vaccine for cervical cancer. It was at the end extremely successful. But why it was successful? Because we actually understood this complexity early on. And we actually did work with multiple stakeholders. A vaccine was delivered by both pediatricians and OBGYNs. It required public health endorsement. It required reimbursement, which is sometimes a different decision. It required obviously regulatory approval, and it required to be globalized. So it had to be appropriate for global markets. So it was a massive effort to combine all these objectives together. But because we understood the complexity, we actually were able to, I almost called it the marketing 360. We basically took care of all the needs of all the stakeholders. And yes, it was in a big company, so obviously there was more funds for that than if we were a small startup. But I think it was the case where I understood that in very complex situations, healthcare is frequently complex. You really cannot get away with quick and dirty. You have to do complex and co-creation.
I think with what you mentioned there, what do you think is typically misunderstood in innovation for patient care delivery and as well as engagement?
I think what is misunderstood frequently is that there are simple solutions.
Okay.
And I actually think that when I've worked with the startup companies, my observation is that there is a certain bias among venture capital to support solutions that really appear relatively simple and straightforward, because they can see and understand how this will get traction quicker and how a simple solution solves really a big problem. And that's perfectly fine. There can be solutions like that. What I see is that there's a less understanding that truly we create progress in medicine frequently when we solve complex issues. So I've seen solutions that were a little bit more complex, but also much more thorough and would truly address a problem. I saw there was less interest to fund them because it's a little bit more difficult, especially for people who are not truly in healthcare, to kind of wrap their head around it and see how this can help and how this will get traction. You need to have so many stakeholders. But for anything in healthcare, you have to have many stakeholders. So I think belief in the a little bit oversimplified solutions, I think that's the mistake that many people make sometimes.
Okay.
Looking for simple solutions where healthcare is not simple by definition.
Okay, gotcha. What do you think is something that as well that maybe large organizations have to their ability and to their advantage that they're able to innovate a little bit quicker, right? Because typically we talk and think about disruption when it comes down to startups, but how can that be working in an organization that's super large?
It's interesting because the super large organizations, they definitely have resources, they have means to create a breakthrough innovation. And the only thing, in my opinion, that prevents them from doing that is basically the risk aversion. There are very interesting methodologies to help companies to do breakthrough innovations. It could be a blue ocean strategy methodology, it could be design thinking, it could be a few others. And if the methodology is followed systematically, and also if the company knows how to basically test this breakthrough innovation, disruptive innovation before it enters the market, or even organize a small pilot type of launch to learn, it actually de-risks a lot of breakthrough innovations, and they are not as risky as companies believe. I actually think that the most risky thing that the company can do is to never implement a breakthrough innovation, because companies like this usually disappear. You cannot continuously grow through incremental innovations, meaning, small improvements. Eventually, you are outsmarted by competitors. You have to eventually bring to a market something more disruptive, more breakthrough.
How do you think, innovators, founders, leaders, executives can really think about risk when they're going to work with providers? How can they actually focus and bring their solution to market a little bit more? Can you dive into that?
So I think that maybe let's talk a little bit more about a systematic process. I think the innovation process requires, on one hand, very good understanding of the market and customers, and this includes providers. On the second hand, it requires internal capabilities. But three reasons why companies fail is they don't have capabilities to meet their strategic goals. They don't fully understand the market, especially the trends that are just emerging. And the third reason is when the innovation strategy is not aligned with the business strategy. So if these three things are taken care of, and if there is a process and the governance and the right systems to manage the innovation pipeline, then a company can actually succeed. Is it in healthcare or is it in any other sector, to be honest? But these things are mandatory in a way. Otherwise, innovation really happens in a very erratic and chaotic way. Okay. Meaning it most of the time doesn't happen.
Okay. What is your way, because I know you work with leaders as well directly, that you actually help develop their own capabilities to innovate, to bring about solutions in the healthcare? How do you go about doing that?
So I think that's a good question, and I have a couple of ways. So one is I help directly as a consultant to make sure that company has capabilities, market understanding, the right process. I call it innovation playbook, but also the systems, right? I provide a system, it's called Transformation 360. It's the newest software on the market that actually supports innovation management. So that's that. The second area where I help leaders is I actually provide a lot of education, because innovation is also misunderstood. People sometimes don't know where to start. There's no agreed upon curriculum. How do you learn to become a better innovator? So I deliver some live courses and online courses. But very recently, I created a tool that I think could be very powerful, because it's really a self-coaching tool. I have it actually somewhere here, so I can show it. I developed an innovation planner. And what the innovation planner is, it's a combination of a planner, so you can track your innovation goals and milestones of your different projects. But it's also a workbook. Every month, you get articles on different aspects of innovation with exercises that you can do yourself. And you also get links to free online courses. So it's a learning program that people can do during a year, for 12 months, does not require spending enormous amount of time, but actually presents this very systematic approach to how to think about innovation and managing the innovation pipeline. So I've just issued this book a little bit less than a month ago, and to my total surprise, it already reached a best-selling status. So it seems like there is a need for a tool like that, and people are really eager to improve their knowledge and skills about how to manage innovations.
If you could give us a little sneak peek, what do you think is one thing that, a leader should know in that process, maybe that they could take away from your planner?
It's difficult to say because there are 12 months in the book, right? But I would say that it's very important to start in the right place. So you need to think about, is your market understanding truly very thorough and systematic, and what process do you have to continuously monitor the market? Because you cannot properly innovate if you don't understand the market. So that's one question. Or would you rather start with assessing your capabilities? Because I think these are two starting points. Companies typically either really have generally good capabilities, but maybe a little bit have tunnel vision around their market, or the other way around. They actually understand the market pretty well, but not necessarily have the right capabilities. And one of these starting point is very important. So that's one, probably most important aspect of starting. When you want to start innovate, you need to start to think about these two aspects.
What are some strategies as well that you tell leaders to help navigate, a turbulent market within healthcare to bring about the solutions?
So again, I would like to come back to the market understanding, which is one.
Okay.
But I think that it's very difficult in the current turbulent environment to understand what the future will bring. And I think the mistake that we typically make is we try to foresee the future. We try to put probabilities on it. We look at some emerging trends and we try to guess what is the probability that this trend will emerge, when it may happen, how it will impact our company. And I actually think it's wrong because we cannot predict the future. And I like to use an example of ChatGPT. How many companies were completely surprised when ChatGPT entered the market? How many companies really knew it would come? Probably only technology companies. IT companies. But none of the clients that I worked with around that time actually understood that ChatGPT is coming and how it will change the world. So I think what we need to do, instead of trying to predict the market, because we can never do it, we should try to build plausible scenarios. Building plausible scenarios is the only way to try to make the future a little bit more closer or better understood. And so you don't have to put probabilities on these scenarios. They just need to be plausible. And there are usually, when we think about the future, there are usually 2 to 3 major scenarios that may happen that may be mutually exclusive, or eventually they may be overlapping somehow. But we need to be prepared for all of them. Right? I'm not talking about 20 scenarios, but probably 2 to 3 major scenarios that can affect my company. And only when we have these scenarios well outlined, by understanding not only trends that already exist in the market, but all these emerging trends, we can think about how these emerging trends will evolve potentially in the couple of years and what this will bring to us as a company. Only under these circumstances we can actually try to get the company ready for these scenarios. And this drives a lot of innovative solutions, not only new products, but also new business models, maybe new supply, maybe new manufacturing opportunities, and so on and so forth.
With that, is that something that, leaders should do on a quarterly basis? Is that something they should do annually? How should they really think about that?
I think that in most companies, I've seen this done annually, and I think it's probably the right time, the right pace, with the only exception if something dramatically changes. So if something dramatically changes, like, again, nobody envisioned ChatGPT and out of a sudden it happened, then there is a need for another discussion because it may change some of the scenarios. So the annual process with the flexibility to sometimes kind of pause and reflect on something that has just happened and change the scenarios.
Okay. I think with what you mentioned, it brought me back to a previous thought as well, is, that's a human trait, right? To envision the future, to actually picture. And so what do you think leaders can use to, I guess, navigate maybe something as a failure point of predicting and analyzing and going too deep into that? How can they actually figure out the way that they can escape their mind in a way to find, hey, this is what I need to do to make sure that I'm not falling into a trap of thinking?
The only way to do it is to to be inclusive, to invite as many diverse stakeholders as possible, because everyone has a different point of view, because they have different roles, either in the company or outside. So I am always advocating to invite for the first stage, which is the market analysis, the analysis of market trends and forces. You need to get input from people from multiple departments in your company, external people like some key customers, maybe key suppliers, maybe advisors, and potentially customers and patients. It depends on the industry that you are in. Because I think, again, another mistake that I frequently see is just to do annual planning within C-suite. And C-suite, it consists of people who usually have the same view of the world because they work so much together. There is very little diversity in the thinking process at some point in time when the team continuously works together. Inviting diverse stakeholders to this first stage of market understanding, to me, is critical.
Do you think there's any other failure points that you see leaders commonly take that you would probably advise against?
So I think we talked about two, right? We talked about not inviting enough stakeholders. We talked about trying to guess the future instead of doing scenario planning. I think another one is not having the right rigorous approach to actually choosing innovations to innovative solutions to move forward. Because once we understand the market and we kind of have our strategic goals, we can do hackathons or ideation sessions, and we can have multiple ideas about how to address this particular strategic goal. And without a rigorous process of identifying which ideas we actually move forward, this is another situations when companies sometimes do not pick the optimal projects. And why it's happening? Because the leaders have their opinions. They don't have a strict process, so we fall under the kind of, we do it based on the opinions of people who are higher in the hierarchy, right? The CEO picks which projects we move forward if we don't have the right process. And the right process means that there is a very rigorous assessment of the feasibility of the resources required, alignment with the strategic needs, and then we actually test these hypotheses already in the market somehow through market research, through working with advisors. And there are many, many other ways to actually test ideas in the market before actually move them forward. And that's the piece that is missing.
Okay. What are certain things that you've seen from, really great companies to really have a great standard of excellence in a global standard of care as well for, startups and organizations? Is like, what have you seen really help with them?
So I think that what help is when people do have, I probably will repeat myself a little bit, but
Okay.
I've seen that companies that have, and both big and small, companies that have a systematic process to approach their innovation development, they do way better. I call it innovation playbook, and it doesn't have to be 200 slides. It can be a very short and lean process that describes how do we ensure market understanding, how do we do the ideation, how do we select projects, how do we develop them, and how do we commercialize. If a company has the right approach to these 5 stages of innovation described in a short playbook, these companies usually do better.
Okay. To switch gears a little as well, what is some advice that maybe you'd have for outsiders, maybe other healthcare professionals that aren't entrenched into a startup or a large organization to actually make that transition to innovate within healthcare? What would your advice be?
So if someone wants to innovate in healthcare, I think it's important to understand healthcare as such. And it's difficult for people who never worked in healthcare. So I recommend that companies or individuals who want to move into healthcare and maybe never had this experience, that they always ensure that they surround themselves with people with clinical background. And you actually test your ideas before you implement them, before you move forward. So for startup companies, I always recommend that they have a clinical advisor or a fractional chief medical officer, someone who was actually in the clinic and understands how it is done. So they can avoid, that's the biggest frustration of technology professionals when they move into healthcare, is that they really don't know how to navigate that because there are so many stakeholders. So I think having a clinical advisor is absolutely necessary.
Okay. Where do you find the best talent? Where do you find these clinical advisors?
I'd like to mention a few organizations that I am aware of. So, for example, there is an organization called Match Day Health. A match day is the day when physicians in the United States get matched with the residency. That's where the name comes from, right? It's not a dating site. Because it sounds a little bit like a dating site. So Match Day Health is actually a startup company, very successful so far, that is trying to match physicians with some of these technology jobs and technology advisory roles. So that's one source. There's another organization, it's called Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. It's also very interesting because Society of Physician Entrepreneurs basically gathers physicians who have this entrepreneurial spirit. They may be innovators themselves, or they may be actually seeking to work with startup companies. And I've seen a lot of people, I actually got into a few advisory roles because I'm part of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. And that's how I met a lot of startups who were looking for physicians in this particular organization. So these are 2 that I am aware of. There are probably more, by the way.
Okay. And how can you potentially speak to these advisors to help bring them onto your team? Because I've heard there's tons of clinicians that actually want to join and innovate it and bring about the technology that they want to see in the system. But how can you actually speak to them to actually come onto your team? Because it is a risk, isn't it?
Well, I think that the risk, I don't know what risk you have in mind, to be honest. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
I would say just that transition, right, can be a risk. You're coming from a system, right?
Yeah.
You've taken some steps towards your education. You've gone through that process. You've put in a lot of time, right? Now to go into a company which might not make it, it can be
Yeah.
hard. So that's the risk that I kind of envision. But that's what I would say.
Yes, and I think that I've seen a lot of fractional roles. So I think that from the physician perspective, I agree. There is a certain level of risk. So everybody has to assess what kind of risk they can take in their lives. And it depends also from the family situation, financial situation, etc. I would recommend, if someone really wants to do it, to start with fractional roles. So you don't have to give up your practice. Maybe you give up 1 day of the practice per week, and kind of 1 day a week or 2 days a week you work for a startup, but the remaining days you keep your practice. And I've seen a lot of physicians actually doing that. So you don't go full time into a startup if you are really not sure if you want to take this level of risk. Now, the other thing is, if the company doesn't make it, you can always come back to your physician's work. I have not seen, the places where there are too many physicians and they wouldn't, hire another one. You can always open a practice. So somehow I don't see this from a physician perspective. The risk, in my opinion, is not that huge because, again, you can always come back to practicing medicine afterwards. But it always depends on an individual situation. So I suggest to take it, based on your individual situation.
That makes complete sense. And that's great advice. I think with that as well, how have you kind of implemented behavioral science frameworks to actually help in innovation of healthcare?
That's a good question also, because I think behavioral sciences, interestingly, advanced very much in the last years, similarly to technology. And we are at in a situation where we can combine both. And I mentioned before some of these sophisticated chatbots. They are based on behavioral sciences. So the way how they work must be aligned with behavioral sciences. But a specific example that I want to give is, I'm a medical advisor at a startup company called Vitya. And Vitya developed a very interesting tool to help patients with chronic diseases, starting with diabetes, especially the ones who have been recently diagnosed, to basically manage their disease in this whole, new situation. What we know about people and the adherence to medication is that people are notoriously adhering to medications and to physicians' advice. But for a variety of reasons. Some people are simply forgetful, maybe don't fully understand the risks of not taking medications. Others maybe have some misperceptions about the disease or the medications. There are other people who may think it's too difficult and they lose motivation. So there may be some gaps in understanding of the disease, education about the disease. We call it health literacy. So how do you develop a solution that is somehow tackling most of these problems? And this company is actually doing that. The application, because this is obviously an application, on one hand sends reminders. So that's the simplest thing that's been around for a long time. It sends reminders. But then it also has disease education. So there are some articles that people can read. There is, eventually there will be a chatbot that people can talk with. The chatbot is being currently trained on a book that has been specifically written for diabetic patients. And there's also an actual person, a health coach, behind the chatbot. So if a chatbot doesn't answer a question, the question goes back to the health coach. So which eventually trains the chatbot. But there's also gamification aspect. People will be getting loyalty points. And then the application will be linking with different stakeholders in healthcare where these loyalty points can be redeemed. It's a system that's very similar to frequent flyer programs, where you collect miles with an airline. You usually can redeem these miles also in an online store. You don't have to only pay for flight tickets, right? So the idea is a little similar. But this is a good example of combining behavioral sciences and technology to fully support a patient. And then, again, the AI behind will start seeing what works for an individual patient. So the approach will become increasingly personalized. If someone needs only reminders, they will get reminders. If someone likes loyalty points, they'll get more loyalty points. If someone wants to talk, they will be talking with the chatbot. So I think that's the technology and behavioral sciences combined together can give really interesting personalized approach to helping patients in the way that they need it.
I think with innovation, a lot of people think of technology, but is there any non-technological innovations that you're seeing within healthcare that makes you excited?
Yes, I have. Although I do have to say that many of these non-technological innovations, they are at some point in time, they are easier with technologies. Because, for example, telemedicine, it's easier with technology, even though it theoretically can be done with just calling a person and talking on the phone. But I also want to say that there are some innovations in medicine that are business models innovations. For example, when you as an adult in the United States want to get vaccinated, you usually don't go to a doctor, you go to a pharmacy, right? But it wasn't always like that. I think at some point in time, the public health realized that it's not very cost effective and it's a bottleneck to ask adult patients to go to a physician to get vaccinated because most adults do not go to a physician on an annual basis. By the way, most men don't. Women may go once a year, but most men, they disappear from the healthcare system in their early 20s because they don't do so much sports anymore and then reappear with the first symptoms, cardiac symptoms, when they are in their early 50s. And there's a big gap, right? So how do you vaccinate them? And there was a decision made that pharmacies will actually get a possibility to vaccinate people. And this was a total breakthrough. Now United States has one of the highest, for example, vaccination rate for flu among adults in the world because the barriers to vaccinations have been eliminated. And it did not require any technology. It just required a policy decision. So this is an example that happened many years ago. Another example of innovation that, again, happened by pharmacy was all these minute clinics, right? They also appeared some time ago. They were not always around. It's a combination of emergency medicine and primary care, right? To basically relieve the emergency medicine and then provide simple primary care to people who don't have to go to the emergency department. So that was another business model innovation that happened. So I think these didn't require any technology.
I think something you touched upon as well is kind of the medical adherence. Can you dive into that a little bit deeper and any other things that you find interesting over there in that space?
You see, we were trying to solve medical adherence for as long as I remember, because it was always a problem. So I've seen a lot of solutions in the past. I've seen, for example, we started with sending text messages to people. I remember I worked for a long time in vaccine companies. I remember when for vaccines that have more than one dose, we were trying to improve patients' adherence to the second and third dose by sending text messages. And sometimes we were sending emails. And then we moved to applications that were sending reminders and emails. But again, it was not enough. I think only now when we have this fully developed technologies and better understanding of human nature, we are getting with better solutions. But I think that most solutions that I've seen are somewhere around gamification and chatbots. This is the most recent development. And there are several companies who try to solve this problem. So I think eventually it will become, I don't know if it will solve it all, completely, but it will become less of a problem.
Okay. I think before we go on to the lightning round, I think, is there anything that you speak to leaders and tell them about to really help them adapt to a changing market out there to make sure that they're bringing their innovations, their solutions quicker? I know we touched on a lot of things, but is there anything else that you give from maybe a mindset perspective or one other nugget that you think people are missing?
Yes, I think that that's a good question because we haven't talked about everything that surrounds the culture, for example. So what I usually point out as well to leaders is that there is not such a thing as one innovative culture. And that's one of the misperceptions. People think, oh, we need to have more innovative culture. And what they think about is usually entrepreneurial culture, which is one of the innovative cultures. But there are a few other. So, for example, a company or a team that has to implement is in the process of commercializing a product, they cannot be too entrepreneurial because they would be changing the strategy all the time. Because entrepreneurial really means, it's a little bit, you try this, you try this, you try that, and then maybe you move forward, you move backward, you prototype, you move backward again, etc. This is the entrepreneurial culture is very good in developing new solutions that are not yet on the market, right? When you prototype and you change and you move back and forth. But for example, if you want to be good in commercialization of your new solutions, you need a much more steady, goal-oriented culture where you will really move step by step according to the plan that you have. And you cannot be going back and forth all the time. So sometimes what happens is a person with a very entrepreneurial mindset gathers a few other with a very entrepreneurial mindset, and they create a startup. And they develop a fantastic new breakthrough solution. They go back and forth and they reiterate, etc. And then they try to implement it with the same culture, and it doesn't work. That's why sometimes we say that the people who are the founders of the company should not be the CEOs. Because then you need to hire someone, chief operating officer, chief commercial officer, CEO, who actually have a different mindset and a different culture. And they do it very thoroughly, step by step, actually implement the solution. So that's the one advice I give, is that your culture needs to match your objective.
I like that. That's a different way of thinking.
It's a different way of thinking. Yes, exactly.
All right, perfect. Now it's on to the lightning round. So my first question for you is, what is the most underrated skill that you think a leader can have in healthcare?
Active listening. The real leader needs to understand first. And for that, so-called active listening is the way when you ask questions and you actively listen and ask more questions and ask more questions. You really talk with people in order to understand. That's the most underrated skill, in my opinion.
Okay. If you could describe the future of healthcare innovation in one word, what would it be and why?
Personalized. I'm actually very excited about the possibility to have healthcare that matches individual needs much more than what we currently have.
And my last question for you is, what is the best leadership advice that you ever received that you think other leaders can take from?
The best advice I've received was that the trust is the glue of business. I think without trust it's very difficult to do business. So leaders need to spend time on building trust across stakeholders, not only with their team, but with their vendors, advisors, with everyone that they are working with. It's so much faster to do business with people who trust you, because they don't question your motives, they don't question your capabilities, they don't question if you can deliver results or not. They just work with you smoothly. So I think building trust is the best advice I've ever got.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for your time on the K in Clarity podcast. For everything that you've given the guest, is there some final thoughts that you have that you want them to hear?
I think that one thing I would like to encourage all people who listen to this podcast to do is to actually check out this innovation planner that I mentioned, because many things that we touched upon are actually more elaborated there. So this could be a good way to get a little bit more systematic approach to innovation and maybe find out things that you didn't know about.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you for your time again. Where can people find you, follow you, and connect with you?
So I am on LinkedIn, and I think I'm relatively easy to find because I don't think there's another person with the same first and last name on LinkedIn. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. The Innovation Planner can be found on Amazon, so that's also a good information. And I think that's probably all I want to say.
Okay. Well, Kasia, thank you for your time. Thank you for going through your thoughts and telling us that you need.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Of course. You have a good day.
You too.